Recovered alcoholic, my name is Pat Rogan. Thanks to the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous outlined in our big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the program of AA, I have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And I can never express to you how grateful I am. AA didn't just save my life, but it gave me a new life. And I absolutely love my new life. I don't love all the moments in it, but just far better than the life I had before I got here. This is just incredible. And I love this place. This is a great meeting. Getting down near the end soon of this series. We've been talking to, I'm going to read something on 12 and 12. I don't usually go to 12 and 12 too much. But great essays that Bill wrote. You know, the directions to the steps are in the big book. But Bill expands 13 years later, writes essays on the steps, and there's just so much, just has such a much broader outlook and information on the steps. But this is one of my favorite lines out of the 8th step it comes out of, and it says, since defective relations with other human beings have nearly always been the immediate cause of our woes, including our alcoholism, no field of investigation can yield more satisfying and valuable rewards than this one. Calm, thoughtful reflection upon personal relations can deepen our insight. We can go far beyond those things which were superficially wrong with us to see those flaws which were basic flaws, which sometimes were responsible for our whole pattern of our lives. Thoroughness, we have found, will pay and pay handsomely. And to me, this whole journey has been about relationships, faulty relationships, if you will, you know, and repairing these faulty relationships. The first relationship being that with God, you know, developing I'm not so much at the beginning an understanding of God, but a relationship with God of some sort, you know, at least to get to know that God was my solution. And the second is to know me, to get a relationship with me, to know the truth about myself, know the truth about God, know the truth about me, so that I can go out and repair my relationships with you in steps 8 and 9. And I know I'm supposed to be on step 10 tonight, but I don't know if we'll get there. But because, you know, we've been talking a lot about reparation. We've been talking a lot about getting right in the physical dimension, getting right with the people around us. And I don't know where these defective relationships came from for me. I don't know if I'm even capable of knowing where those defective relationships were created. Defective relationship with God, with myself, and with you. I mean, I was that guy that suffered from false pride. I was just a piece of shit when I walked into the room. I was never the false pride where I'm better than you. I was never better than you. I was always less than you. You know, I always felt less than. And part of that was I was shorter than everybody else. I was skinnier than everybody else. I started school at 5. Everybody else started at 6. I know they're not, I don't think they even do that anymore. You know, but if mommy didn't have daycare, you went to school no matter what your age was back then, you know. And I don't know, I've read stuff on it. There's plenty of books on where that comes from. And what I've learned is that where that came from isn't even accessible for me. It's a part of my history that I can't even access. It probably, they say before 5, and I don't know about you, but I can't remember anything before 5. You know, the first thing I really remember, the first memories I remember are my memories of skipping school at 5. You know, that's really the first thing. If I go back to my childhood, and my sponsor, maybe I'll talk more about this next week, but my sponsor had me do a timeline at 15 years sober. And that timeline, he said, take 5-year increments of your life and write down significant events, good and bad. You know, bad memories, good memories in those 5-year increments. It's a really cool exercise. Very revealing, by the way. But I couldn't remember anything before 5. I couldn't remember anything before 5. And what I started to remember between 5 and 10 was fear. A lot of fear. And being bounced around from house to house. You know, living with my aunt, my Uncle Jack and my aunt. Living with my grandmother. Living with my Uncle Frank and my Aunt Carol. just being bounced around. And what really was revealed is where my fear of cockroaches came from. But, which is a terrible fear. Not those big Buick-looking things, but those little. I guess, are they German cockroaches? That's a terrible thing to label them like that. Huh? Nothing against the Germans, but those bastards. Like I can remember as a child living at my Uncle Jack's house, who was a Slav, and waking up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and cockroaches being all over the walls, and I couldn't get out of bed to go to the bathroom, and I would just wet the bed, and then I would get berated the next morning for, made fun of the next morning for that, and so ever since then, I mean, my wife tells me there's a cockroach in the house. I say, no, there's not. No, I saw one. No, you didn't. Call the bug man. Yeah, I'm just like in denial about cockroaches. But it revealed a lot of stuff. It revealed, possibly where some of my trust issues come from. I was sharing with somebody earlier about night after night staring out the window, waiting for my father to come and pick us up, but never showing up, And what I've read and from psychiatric professionals is that our trust issues, our abandonment issues are developed before we can even remember. They may even be developed in the womb. Most of them are developed in our first few years of life. Definitely in my case, before I was 5, So I can't even access those memories. I'm incapable of accessing those memories, and I'm incapable of knowing why every relationship that I had was defective. Either trust issues and abandonment issues, basically, And the sad part is, what the punishment of the cheater is? They can't trust anybody. What the punishment of the thief is? They can't believe it. They know that everybody's out to get their money. What the punishment of the liar is? They can't believe anybody. That's who I became. Just manipulate. Trap you. Into my life. My relationships with women were not relationships. They were hostages. I would try to get you in a position where you couldn't leave. But I knew you were going to run. So I would have a backup plan. But I don't know where all that comes from. But the two amends that we talked about last week, the financial amends and the criminal amends, are the easy ones. Really, I mean, we don't think that when you have to pay the money. You know what the hard ones are financially? I learned this from Arthur Rice. You know what the hard ones are financially? When you have the money, right? When you don't have the money, you can't pay them anyway. That's easy. I'll create a payment plan somewhere down the road, right? But when you have the money, it's hard to write the check. It's hard to get. I'll never forget. I shared with you guys my tax issue, where I didn't have to call the IRS; they called me, and I got to make restitution with the IRS, and they only went back a year, and then they let the rest of it go. So the next year, I want to be legal. I want to file an income tax that I recall, that I actually know what I'm signing. And I don't know anything at this point because I have no history. Now I'm 37 years old at this point, 38 years old. I have no history of filing taxes. So I don't know about S Corps and LLCs and quarterlies and, all that kind of crap, So I'm just this contractor out there making money and figure I'll just take care of it at the end of the year. Well, I go to the end of the year and my accountant hands me my taxes and says I owe $8,000, right? Now, how can that be? Well, that's, you're supposed to pay quarterly or monthly and set up an LLC or an S Corp so that you don't have to pay twice the workman's comp, and just a bunch of that kind of simple stuff. And I owe like $7,800. I have $8,000 stashed, right? And I'm complaining in a meeting in the Boca Boys Club, these tough love mentors of mine. And I'm sharing that I can't believe that I was able to save $8,000 this year, and the IRS wants $7,800 of it. And Bud Reichart, God rest his soul, takes a pack of cigarettes. At that time, we were smoking in me, throws them at the table and says, well, what the hell is the problem then? Write the check. There was no problem in his eyes because I had the money. In my eyes, I don't want to part with that shit. I've been saving that, but I wrote it. It was hard. And his advice was, do it now, because the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be. But those are the easy ones, right? The criminal ones, those are the easy ones, because I benefit from it, right? I mean, if you have to do time or something, it's not an easy one, but it's something I'm going to have to do one way or another. But the relationships with family members and siblings, that's where it gets difficult. That's where it gets difficult. With the ex-wife or with the current wife, that's where it gets difficult. How do I get honest in a situation that might cause me to lose the relationship? And that's tough stuff right there. I struggled with it. My ex-wife, at about, I guess I was about 4 months sober, finally lifted the restraining order, and we started talking, and I'm thinking, I cannot go and Bill talks about it. If we've been wild, if we've cheated, should we go to our wife and tell her that we've been cheating, that we have been unfaithful, and thank God Bill wrote it, not Lois, because it says not always. And that's, is this going to do more harm than good? Now here's the flip side of that question. Am I going to be able to stay sober living that lie? Right? Or am I going to risk blowing up the relationship by admitting that I've been unfaithful? That's a tough call right there. And that's where some strong sponsorship comes in. And I don't even know if my sponsor had the answer to that. That's just a tough one. And I struggled with it. And I was asked in the spur of the moment. I don't know if I ever spoke at a meeting. I was, like I said, I was not even a year sober. And the bottom line group, we had this guest speaker coming, and the guest speaker didn't show up, and they said, Pat, you're speaking tonight. Yeah. And I go to speak, and now I have never spoke anywhere before. And when you're under a year sober, you don't have a lot of hope. You have a lot of what it was like. You don't have a lot of what it's like now. So it was a what it was like story. And in the meantime, she was my ex-wife, who had just dropped the restraining order, had snuck into the back of the room to see what this AAA was all about, and I basically dumped the fifth step on the group, and it was all out there, the girlfriends and this and that, and it was just and then my buddy Jeff is sitting where Pierre's sitting, and he's going. And he's pointing to the back, and I'm going, I got this, Jeff. And I just kept going, man. And she slammed that door, and I guarantee you, if she could have put that restraining order back on, it would have gone back on. But she couldn't get it reinstated. She had no cause. But I'll tell you what happened because of that. Now we didn't talk for a while, but the healing began. You follow me? The healing began at that moment for both of us, right? I no longer have to worry about who she's talking to, who's going to say what. Is she going to run into one of them? Is somebody going to say something about one of them? Every time I saw her talking to somebody, I'm going, oh my God, is this going to come out in the open? I don't have to live in that fear anymore. And she finally knows I'm not crazy. Because that's what I told her. Oh, you're just imagining shit, you're just trying to cause problems, And she finally knew, no, this was the truth, and the truth was finally out there. And with the truth, healings begin. Now, I mean, the good news is, months later we started getting back together, and we got to know each other again, sober, and 2 years into recovery, we were remarried. And that was the good news at 2 years, not the good news at 15, but it was good news. It was the good news at 2 years. But here's what that allowed. That allowed the two of us to raise our two sons together for 15 years until our sons had left the house. And maybe I'll share the rest of that story some other time. But it didn't last forever. Let's just say that. And it ended on good terms. It was just, to be honest with you, I had begun a new way of life. And some normies don't want this way of life. And I don't know anything about balance. What balance means to me, when you say I need balance, you know what I hear? I want to do less in AA. That's what I hear. And for me to create balance would mean I'd have to do less here. And I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do less here. This is my life. I have a life because of this. And if you can't be along for that ride, this probably isn't going to work out. And it was exciting and cool to see Pat sober and, doing the right thing and being trustworthy and all that kind of stuff. But, she had just been to her, in her words, I'm not going to another one of those effing gratitude dinners ever again. I'm just done with these meetings. I just don't, and she was going to 9th chapter meetings and all. She just had enough. I want to go out Friday night, Saturday night, have a couple drinks and dance. Right? I want to go to the meeting Friday night. I want to go to the meeting Saturday night. That's where my happy place is, not in a bar dancing while you drink and smoke your pot. I'm just not doing it. I don't want to get in the car and smell that anymore. I just don't want to be part of that. I can't be part of that. I can't. And so, I'm blessed to this day, and I'll talk more about that, to be with somebody who's all in recovery also, as I am. I could have it no other way. So I was able to mend that relationship, taking a risk. There's risk involved. And that's that, at the end, in the how it works, and on the next last page of how it works, where it talks about, suppose we fall short of the chosen ideas and stumble, does that mean we're going to drink? Well, not necessarily. But as it say, if we know that we did wrong and we ask God to take us to better things and we get back on track, we brush ourselves off and get back on track, surely we're going to stay sober. But if we continue that behavior, then we are surely going to drink. And he says these are facts out of our experience. So then I get to this place where I say, look, there's bells you can't ring. There's bells you can't unring. Right? You can't unring a cheat bell. You can't unring the lie. So we have to be careful where we fall short. I got to be careful where I fall short. I can't fall short in those areas. And that road narrows, and we talked about that in 6 and 7. That road narrows as we go down the road. It's not about cheating anymore. It might just be about lust. And then it might not be just about lust. It just might be about flirting. The road just starts to narrow as we go down the road. For me, I don't know about for her, but for me, it starts to narrow, which I'm sure it does for her too. But the family, my stepfather, God, he got into a bad deal. My mother was trying to raise 4 kids on her own, and when my father left at a very young age, my mother remarried another flaming alcoholic, who got the opportunity to live with me, who was an addict alcoholic big time. And this poor guy, I used to take his car, tell him I'm going to the store, I'll be back in a couple, and I'd be back in a couple of weeks, and a lot of time the car came back on a tow truck, on a flatbed, because I'd be trail riding with it or something. It was I swear to God, I brought it back missing a rear wheel. Where's the wheel? I don't know. It's in the woods somewhere. Little Volkswagen Fastback. But that's the kind of stuff he had. He ended up divorcing my mom because 3 out of the 4 of us caught the bullet. There's me and my sister who's 2 years less sober than me, and then it skipped my brother, and my baby sister died of an overdose 17 years ago. But 3 out of the 4 of us caught the bullet. He was dealing with 3 addicts and alcoholics in that house, and my mother, who refused to let him discipline us, which was just, it was bad. And so they ended up divorced. Then after we were all gone, they ended up remarried again. Isn't that crazy, right? How do you make amends for that, right? And I made I made the financial amends between him and my mother. And that isn't really what they wanted, but he may have wanted it. But I made all the financial amends that I could make with him. And he's been my father, for the last 35 years, and so I do anything I can for him at any time. And it's just there's just no way I will ever complete the amends for him. And you know what happens when we're in this recovery, we're on this road to recovery, we do it because we want to, not because we have to. Because it's someone in need and I have the opportunity to help and I'm in a position to help, so I help. And so we could call it, I'm still making amends, but I just look at it as no matter who it was, and if I was in it, had the opportunity to help and I could, I would, and he's that guy. I would do anything for him, and he knows that. And my mother, on the other hand, it had to come through demonstration. There was no amount of money that was going to repair the damage that I did to her. I shared with you guys the sleepless nights and she got a good night's sleep when I was in jail. Leave him there for a while. Let me get some rest. And the robberies, and she didn't even really care about me stealing her stuff, and she just wanted her son back. And, I got the opportunity to demonstrate that. I lost my mother 3 years ago, but over the 31 years sober that I got to live with her, I got to make all the amends that I could possibly make, and then some. And our relationship became an amazing bond between the two of us. And what I think they want and what they really want are two different things. My mother was a 2-time cancer survivor, and that's not what killed her. What killed her was knee surgery. Was the beginning of the end of her. She decided to have knee surgery after surviving cancer twice. And she gets on the table they do the knee surgery. She flatlines on the table and goes into a coma, and they intubate her and all this other stuff. And the power of prayer is an amazing thing, and it's just amazing. But praying for her mother, we had a priest come in, give her last rites, and I wasn't done. I just wasn't done making the amends to my wife. And my wife and I prayed over her. And the next day we're standing, this is after we give her life's prayer. The next day we're standing beside her, looking at her, and she opens her eyes and she looks at me and she says, "Why can't you get along with your sister?" I went, "Really?" That's what was eating her alive, the fact that her siblings didn't get along. It's got chills, Yeah. That's what she wanted, was her children to get along. That's what would make her happy in that moment. Right? Crazy, right? I called my sister that night and said, "We're good. It's all good. You need anything, let me know." And we've always had to say the least, a tenuous relationship. Not going to go into take her inventory, but it was a challenge to call her. Let me just say that. And it's been a challenge to maintain a relationship with her, even though my mother has passed. It's a challenge to maintain a relationship, and you know why I do it? Because my mother wanted it. Because my mother wanted it. That's why I do it. And we do like our book says. We treat them as we would a sick person, as we are or were. And I do anything I can to help her, if I can. But my mother came out of that, right? And my mother went into rehab, and my mother got sepsis in rehab. And she ended up back in the hospital again, in a coma again. And the doctor says, I don't even know why I'm sharing this with you guys. So the doctor shows me her feet, and her feet are black. And the doctor says, "We're going to have to take her feet." And I said, "No, you can't do that." He says, "No, there's no other way. It's either that or let her go." And I said, "Well, you got to do what you got to do." And he left, and my wife and I, Shannon and I, put hands on my mother's feet. And boy, we put some sincere prayers out there. And they took her down to take her feet off the next morning, and they were pink. That's incredible, right? I mean, I don't even know how to explain that. And the doctors are like, I don't know, And I go, we do. We do. And that, my mother came out of the coma. We got another 3 years out of my mother before she passed. You know? My mother put her life in my hands before she passed. Not my stepfather's, not my brother, who's not one of us. Me. You will make the call, son. You will make the call. When it's time, you will know it, and you will make the call. And I did. I had to make the call 3 years later. But just what a gift, to be able to mend those relationships like that. And it was all about demonstration. It was a long road, but it was all about demonstration. It wasn't anything I said. It was in actions. It was in actions. My youngest son, has never seen me drunk. He was 2. Some of you have met him. He's been here. And him and I have this unbelievably unique spiritual bond. But my other son, my oldest son, was 12 when I got sober. And he's seen the shit, man. He's seen the fists go through the walls. He saw my fist come through his bedroom door because he was so afraid he locked himself in his bedroom. And I put my fist through the door and unlocked the door from the inside. He remembers seeing his mother knocked to the floor when I got arrested for assault and battery. The beginning and the end. Those are the kind of memories I gave my child. Those are the kind of memories my father gave me. Where do our defective relationships come from, right? I became my father. I became everything I hated in him. And when it came time to make amends to him, I sat down with him. And I deeply regret what you had to go through and what you had to see and what you had to endure. And he did not accept it well. And he said, yeah, that shit sucked. He said, I was hoping you wouldn't come back. Because they moved. We moved them into an apartment after that, and I got the house. Big deal. Got what I wanted. And when him and his mother started to reconcile, he wanted no part of that. He was glad not to have me around. Because he didn't know me. He didn't know this. He didn't know sober Pat. He only knew violent Pat. What do we call it? Discipline through intimidation. Right? We all know that. How many's old school here? You used to see the look, right? You get the look, right? You got the look, you go, oh shit. We know what's coming after the look. Even with grandma, it was a shoe. Wow. My grandmother could throw shoes around a corner. So, and it's not that we didn't have a bond. It wasn't that we didn't have a relationship. We did a lot of stuff together. I took a lot of action to try to mend that relationship and not to spoil him, but just to do things together sober and enjoy life together sober. Fishing trips and traveling and, all kind of different stuff that we did together. We had a lot of fun together. And it wasn't like the relationship was strained all the time. But anytime I would bring up this amends, he did not want to hear it. He did not want to hear it. So I'm 27 years sober. I'm doing a step series at Palm Bay. And I get this text from him. He says, I want to thank you for all the skills you taught me and the ethics that you've driven into me about working hard and doing what's right. I know there were plenty of speed bumps along the way, but I want you to know how much I appreciate you taking the time to let me learn and providing me with the foundation for being successful. I don't know if I've ever really said thank you. And I just hope I can continue to be that person for my kids. I love you and I look forward to the next time we get together. This is 27 years later. Right? I wrote back, thank you so much. I'm so proud of the man you've become. I couldn't be prouder. Yes, there were speed bumps along the way, and I truly regret that. But you and Joe, his brother, have always been and will always be the most important people in my life. Thanks for being you. I always look forward to seeing you guys. Can't wait to see you again. He writes back, don't regret anything. It was all part of the journey. Have a good night. Forgiveness. Forgiveness. Is there's a line in the ninth step. It says there's a long road of reconstruction ahead. Yeah, for all of us. For all of us. If you're newly divorced and you've lost your kids, or you're not seeing your kids, or there's a warrant out, and you're down here not just because of the sunshine. There's something going on up in the north. If we stay this course, it will be okay. It will all be okay. It will work out, just not in my time. Right? I want immediate gratification. Right? I want to say I'm sorry, and you say yes, come home. Not I'm sorry. Yeah, I've heard that shit before. Yeah. Show me. Prove to me. That's what this is about. That's what this is about. This is not about, that's what I wanted. I wanted to do steps 1, 9 and move back in the house, right? Hey, I'm an alcoholic. I'm so sorry. I'm coming home. You know what she said? I'm sorry too. You're not an alcoholic, you're an asshole. Who drinks a lot. That's a true story. I called home, I said, good news, I found out what's wrong with me. I'm an alcoholic. She said, nope, you're an asshole. Boom. She was pretty accurate. Hey, it takes a long time, to get over the selfishness and the self-centeredness. It takes a long time to change. There's a long road of reconstruction on my end, too. Not just on repairing the damage, but on my end. In 5 years, was I still selfish and self-centered? You're damn right I was. I wasn't drinking. I was a better person. I surely wasn't where I wanted to be, but I surely wasn't where I was. I'm sure I wasn't where everybody wanted me to be either. I got a divorce at 15 years sober. Who does that? Who does that? Who blows up a marriage 15 years sober? Oh, you too?
Too many parallels to our story.
Yeah, that's right. Talk about feeling like a failure, right? You know what that timeline revealed? You know what that timeline revealed? This is scary. That at 15 years sober, I was still a taker in relationships. That I still was living with faulty relationships. That I was still suffering from abandonment issues and trust issues. Still, 15 years sober. That divorce felt like the biggest rejection in my life. I didn't want to drink, but I wanted out. You know what I mean? I wanted out. I want to go live in the woods with deer and shit, dogs and deer. That's what I want, Fuck these people, man, This would be a great world without people, right? I should tell that story, right? So I'm ready to leave the planet. I'm ready, I'm going to Cook's Forest, Allegheny Nationals in Pennsylvania. I'm going there. I got a plan, And I'm driving up and down A1A thinking about how am I going to tell everybody that I'm going to be a hermit, And I get a call from Billy Galvin. And I've shared with you who Billy was in my second step. Billy was my guy that I followed everywhere he went. Because Billy had what I wanted. And that you follow the people that have what you want. And I'm not talking about relationships. The people who are chasing people that have a spiritual solution. That's what Billy was. And where Billy was, that's where I wanted to be. I didn't want to know where there was a meaning. I wanted to know where Billy is. Because Billy was chasing guys like Garrett Muldoon. He was chasing guys like Ben Troxel. He was chasing guys, like Peter. He was chasing guys like I could just go on and on. I mean, there's just so many giants that I've been chasing around the years. And that, I wanted what he had, and he wanted what they had, and so I went where he was. So Billy calls me out of nowhere. I hadn't heard from Billy in about a year, because he had been on this travel league thing with his kids. And I said, hey, Bill. And he goes, yeah. He says, you were on my heart. I just called to see what's up. I said, no, I'm fine. He said, no, something's up. He says, there's a reason why you came on my heart. And this is why if you get a call from me out of the blue, or a text from me out of the blue, that's why. Because you came on my heart in that moment. And I don't ignore that anymore. Because I came on Billy's heart. He knew something was wrong, and he wasn't hanging up until I told him. And I told him, I'm going through a divorce, man. He said, I want out. I said, I want out. Well, we're going to pick you up and take you to a meeting tonight. I said, nah, it's all right. I'm good. I'm good. No, we're going to take you to go see Russell. Oh, I don't do Russell. No. That's the God Squad there, man. I don't do. They say Jesus and all that in the meeting. No, that's not me. He's a tradition violator. It's too bad. We're going to bring you to see Russell. And they take me. He picks me up and takes me on the tracks in North Miami. He was doing a step series there, and Russell opens a meeting like this. If you're new here, you might want to go to a different meeting. He says, I'm here for the guy who's 15, 20, 25 years sober, dying inside. Oh my God, he's talking to me, I mean, that just tears started coming out. Now, anybody that knows Russell, he starts most of his meetings like that, right? But I think it's me, it's about me, right? And I go up to him after me, and I said, oh my God, Russell, you were talking to me. He goes, oh, really? He says, I said, yeah. He says, I told him what was going on. He says, maybe pages 84 through 88 aren't doing it for you anymore. Maybe you need more. Maybe this isn't just, maybe I'm not saying to abandon what you're doing, but maybe you need more. Maybe you need to reach outside of AA for more. And I thought about it, and I said, okay. The next night, I'm having dinner with Peter Marinelli. And Peter and I and Artie from the Florida House, and we're having this debate about people raising from the dead and virgins having babies and shit like that. And actually, Peter was having no debate. I was debating, And Peter looks at me and he says, did you ever think you would be sober 15 years? I said, no. That's a miracle. He said, it is, isn't it? And I said, yeah. And he says, well, anything's possible now, isn't it? I said, yeah, maybe. And we're leaving the meeting. We're outside of Frankie and Johnny's in Deerfield. And Peter looks at me and says, maybe you should go back to the church of your childhood and leave for a good reason. And I went home. It was a Saturday night. I went home and I thought, why did I leave? Why did I leave? I left because I couldn't live up to their principles. That's why I didn't want to live up to their principles. How about that? I wanted to be on the fun side of the island, where they were smoking dope and, drinking and having sex and, all that. I wanted to be on that side, not the side that talks about abstinence and no sex before marriage and all that kind of, I didn't want to be on that side of the island. They had principles over there. We had none over here. Right? That's what, and I went back to church the next morning for the first time since I was 13 years old. Right? And I threw up a prayer. Look, I don't know how this prayer thing works. I just know that prayer changes things. That's all I know. I don't know if it changes me or circumstance. I don't know. I just know that when I pray, things change. And I'll talk more about it in 11, but I'm a big Brother Lawrence fan, practicing the presence of God all the time. All the time. I don't set aside time for prayer. I do pray in the morning, but I pray all day long. I travel with God all day long. I'm constantly throwing up prayers. But I don't know how that works. But I throw up this, God, if you're there, if you're real, show me now. And I had an experience in that church. And I'll share with you that day I put a name to the God of my understanding. And it just changed my direction. It just changed the direction of my life. Rejection or redirection? Seems like every time I've been rejected, I've just been redirected to somewhere better. You know, we stand at that turning point over and over again. Which way are we going to turn? You know, we going to turn away from the recovery, or are we going to turn towards recovery? Are we going to turn away from God, or are we going to turn towards God? You know, which way are we going to turn? We'll stand, and you and I will stand at that turning point over and over and over again. You know, but I know which way I'm turning, because I no longer believe it's rejection. I know it's redirection. And then that's just happened over and over. Maybe I'll talk more about that next week, but that's happened over and over and over again in my life. I'm going to end with this, because I stole this from Charlie Parker. And I love this. You know, I share with you that fear was my demon. You know, that, and it still is. Fear is my thorn. Fear is probably what keeps me going to God, what keeps me coming back to God. You know, without fear, I'm not so sure I would pray before this meeting. I really don't. I've learned that fear has become an asset for me, because it forces me to pray. It forces me to travel with God all day long. You know? And I'm okay with that. I'm all right with that. I love that relationship that I have today. And I find God here in this room. I find God when I'm calling one of you guys. I find God when you call me. I find God when I walk into my church. I find God when I walk into any church. Doesn't matter what church it is. There's so many options I have today to find God. And whatever you think that is, that's what I'm talking about. If you're new here, whatever you think that is, that's what I'm talking about. You know, you get to define it. But I suffered terribly from that fear, from that anxiety, from that torment. And at 16 years old, I picked up a drink and I knew a new freedom and a new happiness. When I picked up that drink, I didn't regret the past or wish to shut the door on it. When I picked up that drink, I could comprehend the word serenity, and I knew peace. When I drank, I could see how my experience could benefit others. When I drank, that feeling of uselessness and self-pity disappeared. When I drank, I lost interest in selfish things and gained interest in my fellows. When I picked up a drink, self-seeking slipped away. When I picked up a drink, my whole attitude and outlook on life changed. When I picked up a drink, fear of people and economic insecurity left me. When I drank, I intuitively knew how to handle situations that used to baffle me. When I drank, I realized that alcohol was doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. How could you not love that? How could you not fall in love with that? Right? Alcohol was not my problem. Alcohol was my solution. The spiritual malady was my problem. That's what we learn here, right? The spiritual sickness, the fear, the anxiety, the torment. Eric Clapton called it torment. I was a tormented child, he said. Man, I needed something more powerful than that. You needed to give me something more powerful than alcohol. And if you suffer from another substance, substitute your drug of choice for alcohol. Whatever it is that takes away that restlessness, that irritability, that discontent, that anxiety, that torment. And these 9 steps put me back together and gave me what alcohol gave me. God gave me what alcohol gave me. I shared with you in my 5th step, it was the first time in my life that I was at peace without a substance in my body. Now, you may not believe that. You know how you can come to believe that? Do the first freaking 9 steps. Right? That's what this is about. That's how faith is born. Right? All we have to do to get started is be willing to believe that this might work for me, or I'm going to die an addict, alcoholic death. That the door number 1 or door number 2. You know? Now, if you're not there, you may not buy into this. You might just say this is all bullshit. But you couldn't scare my ass out of here with God. I was willing to believe that you just might be right. And that's all it takes if you're new to it. That's all it takes is to be willing to say, okay, go from no to maybe this could work. Why? Because I'm going to die. Because I'm going to die. You make a decision to do the work. You do the work. You get the results. There's the faith. There's the faith. When God entered my heart in my fifth step, there's where faith was born. I believed in this power greater than myself. I believed in this misunderstanding of God. That's really what it was for me, a God of my misunderstanding. But I knew at that point it was real. And it was re-emphasized in that experience that I had in the church. And I still want more. I still want more of it. Right? So I'm going to continue to do what this program asked me to do in step 12, and I'm going to continue to grow in understanding and effectiveness, as step 11 says, and I guess we'll get to that next week. Thanks for letting me be here.